Warning, this video contains spoilers for The Batman. You've had at least 2 weeks to see it. Deal with it. The Batman was directed by Matt Reeves, the director of Cloverfield, Let Me In, and the final 2 films of the Planet of the Apes trilogy that came out in the past 10 years. The film stars Robert Pattinson as Batman, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, Jeffrey Wright as Commissioner Gordon, Andy Serkis as Alfred, Colin Farrell as Penguin, and Paul Dano as the Riddler. This was a movie with a lot of hype. It had many production issues due to COVID. Robert Pattinson got COVID while on set. There were all sorts of issues with keeping people in the same room, being filmed during the heights of the pandemic. So I went into this movie with some major concerns, particularly when I saw the trailer, because to be perfectly honest, I felt like I was at a point where I did not need to see another Batman movie. We had just come off of the Christopher Nolan trilogy, which I thought was great. We also had the Snyderverse with Ben Affleck. I just think at a certain point we had kind of reached an overwhelming fatigue of Batman. Did not need to see much more, not just quite yet. I think it's inevitable with how IP is distributed these days. That is how Hollywood is run. It is run by sort of replicating and reproducing old intellectual property that we have seen because it is reliable. It will make money. But I was concerned about that with Batman because I felt like we had kind of reached a tipping point in terms of what more could we really see with this character that we haven't already seen in the past 10 to 15 years. But I am happy to say that I truly, really did enjoy this movie and genuinely appreciated the direction taken with this character by Matt Reeves and the actors. And Warner Brothers and DC deserve a lot of props for taking this sort of risk with this character because it is not a traditional superhero Batman movie. So first, let me talk about some of the things that I loved about this film. I loved the gritty stylization that they used in this movie. It is one of the darkest Batman movies. I really appreciated the fact that this movie did not want to just use cameras that were hyper clear and glossy and almost too realistic, almost too dynamic with modern technology and CEI, but so much in-camera practical effects that were just so well realized. The production value is excellent. The cinematography is fantastic. And they really did a good job of choosing the actors. I thought that Robert Pattinson was great as Batman and as Bruce Wayne. I think there are going to be a lot of people that have an issue with this portrayal of Bruce Wayne, particularly because there's not much Bruce Wayne in this movie. I would say about 90 or 85% of this movie with Robert Pattinson is just with him as Batman. The other 10 to 15% of it is Bruce Wayne, but I think that the point is that the persona of Batman has so overwhelmingly dominated this man's life that he no longer even identifies as Bruce Wayne. He is truly the Batman as a person and not just as a namesake. Zoe Kravitz was good as Catwoman. I do feel like maybe this was one of the weaker points of the film. The relationship with her and Carmine Falcone probably could have been shaved off. I do feel like it adds a little bit to the runtime. It didn't feel like it was necessary very much to telling the plot of this movie. But she was good. The stuff between her and Batman as Catwoman, those were great. Those scenes were great. They had definite chemistry. I would love to see them explore that more in future movies. But I do feel like some of her backstory drags on and adds a little bit of weight to this film that the film didn't need because the film is very long. It is nearly 3 hours long. And at a certain point, you do feel it. Although I would say about 90% of the film, I did not feel the runtime. I only started to feel it when there were certain things that were drawing my attention away from the core thrust of the story. And this was one of those things. Paul Dano was awesome as the Riddler. He's very over the top in some scenes, but he's very low-key and mellow in other scenes. He is threatening. He is scary. The opening kill of this movie is something like straight out of a horror movie. It is terrifying. And he is truly a formidable villain and is worthy of Batman's time. And I think that is what is important about these movies, is that the villain and Batman need to kind of be an even match, and you need to kind of look at Batman sometimes and say, dude, I don't know if you're going to be able to solve this one. One of the standouts of this film is Colin Farrell as Penguin. I mean, my God, he really, truly is unrecognizable in this role. He's so great because he genuinely feels like a character straight out of Goodfellas or out of Scarface. And he just embodies this persona or a caricature of a mobster that felt very much like what you would want the Penguin to be. I really enjoyed Colin Farrell in this movie, and I'm excited for the HBO Max series that is coming out sometime next year. One of my first notes coming out of the theater was that the David Fincher influence is all over this movie. I mean, there are certain elements of this film that are just directly inspired by the movie Seven, which came out in the 90s with Brad Pitt and Kevin Spacey as the film's villain. This movie has a certain vibe of that, where the Riddler is not just a typical, goofy villain like Jim Carrey bouncing around and throwing little green grenades all over the place. He is very much a tortured psychopath who has a mission to expose Gotham's hierarchy for the hypocrisy that they are engaging in. And there are also certain other elements of the film that are very much inspired by David Fincher's film Zodiac, which is based on the Zodiac killer who used ciphers and puzzles that he would send to police, that he would send to the New San Francisco Chronicle, and to try to get these ciphers put up on television so people could try to figure out who he was. Look, this movie is not a movie without its flaws, which I will get into later, but it's a version of Batman that fans have wanted for a long time, particularly those who follow the animated series or the comics, particularly The Long Halloween. Batman the Greatest Detective is really very much a major thrust of this story. I appreciated that because the Batman is grounded in a hyper-realism style and a sinister plot that echoes remnants of these 1990s serial killer films, but also duly inspired by 1940s fatalist Humphrey Bogart type of films like The Maltese Falcon, about a detective trying to solve a crime within this film noir film style. On top of its inspirations, the film is also heavy on themes and symbolism. One example of symbolism throughout the film is how it uses rats feeling like you're trapped in a maze, how rats will gnaw their way out of a situation if they feel cornered. This symbolism of feeling like a rat in a maze is channeled through Batman's desire to escape the tortured past of his parents' death. But as he claws his way out of the prison of his past, he realizes that it is not escape that is necessary in becoming vengeance, but it's actually transition and growth that is necessary in becoming Batman. And in order to truly become the best version of Batman, he also needs to become the best version of Bruce Wayne. Because the movie acknowledges that there will always be problems in the world. There will always be corruption. And Batman is sort of fighting this never-ending war against criminality, which is a war that he must eventually accept that he will never win, unless he eventually accepts that instilling fear in the people of Gotham and the criminals of Gotham will always be inferior to providing hope for the people of Gotham. This theme is particularly evident in one of the final scenes in which Batman is on top of Gotham Square Garden. He has just helped all of the citizens of Gotham escape this, the Riddler'S master plan, where he is on top of the roof and helping a little girl on a stretcher, and as he tries to get away from her, she grabs his arm as if to say, "No, don't go, I want you here. You are a symbol of hope for me. I am not scared of you." And that is a pivotal moment for this story arc, for this Batman, because this scene sort of embodies the realization that Batman needs in order to become the best version that the Caped Crusader can be, because all of the fear or vengeance that he is dishing out across Gotham was not reducing crime. In fact, it's very likely it was having the opposite effect, where just before this scene, when Batman takes down one of the final Riddlers inside of Gotham Square Garden, the police unmask the Riddler, one of the Riddler's henchmen. They unmask him and they ask him who he is, and he says, "I am vengeance." Well, that is exactly a parallel to what Batman says in the beginning of the movie, where the criminals ask him who he is, and he says, "I am vengeance." So he clearly inspired the criminals as much as he defeated the criminals. This film also embraces some very modern themes that some audience members might find disturbing or difficult to process when we're trying to escape to the movie theater. I do think it is necessary for the storytelling of this particular story and what they were trying to do with this character, with the villain, and where this story goes, because this film does explore the concept of fringe groups in our society and the radicalization of those groups and the danger that can pose to our society when people are pushed to their lowest point. And we start to see this concept become more prominent in the scene where Paul Dano's Riddler is having a one-on-one conversation with Batman about the hypocrisy of the Wayne family and how the Riddler was an orphan thanks in part to the Wayne family's failings with an orphanage that Paul Dano's Riddler grew up in. But when Thomas and Martha Wayne were killed, the media came to the aid of Bruce Wayne, calling him an orphan and talking about what a tragedy it is for him to grow up without his parents, while at the same time completely rejecting and ignoring the hundreds of kids that were living in this orphanage, one of them being somebody who would grow up to become the Riddler. And the Riddler's point was to expose this hypocrisy, and that's why he was targeting Bruce Wayne as one of his victims. This turns us to Paul Dano as the Riddler and the motives of this character, which is probably one of the strongest elements of the film. In my opinion, the greatest villains in movies are the ones whose motivations may be horrific and reprehensible, but they're also understandable and somewhat justifiable in their own way. This Riddler is very much a deranged serial killer, but one whose purpose is to expose the corruption and hypocrisy of Gotham's police force and justice system, which he does by shining a light and ultimately murdering the public figures in Gotham who hold positions of power, but who bear most responsibility for the city's decay over the past couple of decades. So yes, some people might go to the theater and feel slightly disturbed by this take on the Riddler, particularly with how his methods line up with some of the worst characters we deal with in the real world right now. Riddler's explored as a very modern villain who uses the internet and live streaming and social media to get his messages across to people. But also it's later discovered as Batman and Commissioner Gordon work together to solve the biggest puzzles and clues that the Riddler leaves behind for them, it's discovered that he was actually part of an online fringe group that had been radicalized over the internet, and he was essentially leading them as part of his what can only be described as a terrorist plot against the people of Gotham, which is basically the big final set piece of the film. So this film essentially uses the Riddler character as a vessel for exploring how we could become radicalized through fringe groups or the internet, ultimately leading people to engage in violence against other people and oftentimes murder in the name of a greater purpose to fight the ailments or corruption that plagues us. And that leads us to my biggest flaw with the movie, which is the final set piece and the Riddler's master plan. The Riddler's evil plan is to blow up 7 or 8 buses that are placed around the city, along Gotham's water lines, along the levees and the dams that hold water in from flooding the city. These bombs go off, create a flood that forces all the people of Gotham to find higher ground at Gotham Square Garden, along with the new mayor, so that they are all trapped like fish in a barrel, and then the Riddler's henchmen will all gather up in the rafters with machine guns and rifles and pick these people off one by one, essentially assassinating hundreds of innocent people. My issue is that this plan by the Riddler kind of falls in direct contrast with the motives that were established throughout the course of the film, which is that, yes, the Riddler might be a psychotic serial killer, but he's a psychotic serial killer with purpose, with a code as to the type of people that he is going to kill. He's not just picking out any random Gotham citizen to kill just for the sake of creating chaos. He's doing it for the sake of exposing corruption, of exposing the hypocrisy of Gotham's founding fathers and Gotham's justice system over the past 20 years. So this giant set piece of the Riddler's henchmen killing people in the crowd and shooting the mayor, who is at this point not a corrupt mayor. This is her first day in office. This is literally just her inauguration day. They try to assassinate her, and it just felt like it wasn't really parallel with what had been established throughout the course of the film. And this film was also very grounded. So the idea that there was this giant generic set piece at the end of the movie of a stadium full of people who need help, whereas the other 2.5 hours of this film were very much just a gritty, boots-on-the-ground detective story, it felt a little bit out of place, even though I do understand that the whole point of this scene was to show Batman that he needed to become more than just a tool of fear to stop criminals, but also to become a beacon of hope for the people who are the true victims of those criminals. One of the things that I appreciated about this movie is it genuinely felt like a full, rounded out, complete story, which is uncommon with a lot of superhero films and movies of this genre nowadays, simply because so much effort and time is put into setting up other storylines where you'll see in a movie like Justice League or, Batman v Superman, where you felt the need to set up the Justice League. So you have those emails with the Justice League and all the different files, and, we're going to set up another movie down the road, and it feels like a huge distraction for the movie. It is to the detriment of this story. It takes you out of the viewing experience. I really appreciated that this movie did not do that until the end, when we get this mysterious character in Arkham Asylum next door to the Riddler, and we can only assume that it was the Joker, played by Barry Keoghan. I have no idea. But he's in Eternals. He's a good young actor. I think he's a good choice for Joker. But the point is, it did take me out of it. It didn't feel like it belonged in this movie. But be that as it may, overall, I'm very happy with The Batman. I think it's one of my all-time favorite Batman movies. I would put it somewhere in my top 3. I'd have to maybe do another video where I could think about it a little bit more. It might be my favorite. I don't know. Have you seen it? If you have, comment below. Tell me about it. Tell me what your favorite part was. Tell me what you think I missed. Tell me what you disagree with in this video. And if you want to see more videos, I'm going to be making more. I'm just getting started. This is a new project for me. I'm starting from scratch. So it would really be great if you could subscribe, like this video. It helps with the algorithm. And I promise that I'll be sending you more content your way. You may not like it, but I'll be working hard on it. I'll see you next time.